In 1324, a man walked out of West Africa with 60,000 people and 18 tons of gold. He wasn't fleeing, he wasn't conquering. He was going to Mecca. Along the way, he stopped in Cairo, and he gave away so much gold to merchants, to beggars, to anyone who approached him, that he single-handedly collapsed the Egyptian economy. Not for a week, not for a month. For 12 years, the price of gold in North Africa and the Middle East remained depressed because of the amount of gold one man distributed on a single trip. His name was Mansa Musa. He was the emperor of Mali, and he is, by every serious economic estimate, the wealthiest individual in the history of the human race. Not Jeff Bezos, not Elon Musk, not John D. Rockefeller. Mansa Musa. Most people have never heard of him. This is his story. To understand Mansa Musa, you first need to understand where he came from. The Mali Empire in the 14th century was not a small kingdom in the jungle. At its height, it stretched across 1.29 million square kilometers, roughly the size of all of Western Europe combined. It controlled the entire western bulge of Africa, from the Atlantic coast to the bend of the Niger River. And it sat on top of two of the most valuable commodities in the medieval world: gold and salt. The empire controlled the gold mines of Bambouk and Bure, the largest known gold deposits in the world at the time. Historians estimate that Mali was producing more than half of the world's gold supply during Mansa Musa's reign. But gold alone did not make Mali rich, salt did. The Sahara Desert contains enormous deposits of rock salt, a substance as valuable in medieval Africa as gold itself, because without salt, food cannot be preserved and people cannot survive in the heat. Mali controlled the trade routes between the gold of the south and the salt of the north. Everything that moved between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean passed through Mali. And Mansa Musa taxed it all. Mansa Musa came to power in 1312. He was not supposed to be emperor. He had been appointed deputy to the previous emperor, Abu Bakr II, a man so obsessed with exploring the Atlantic Ocean that he built 2,000 boats, loaded them with men and supplies, and sailed west into the unknown. He never came back. Some historians have speculated that Abu Bakr II reached the Americas nearly 200 years before Columbus. There is no proof, but there is also no record of his return. Mansa Musa inherited an empire that was already wealthy, already powerful, already respected across the Islamic world. He made it legendary. He was deeply devout, a Muslim who prayed 5 times daily, studied Islamic law, and believed that wealth was a gift from God that carried obligations of generosity. He was also a genius administrator, a brilliant military strategist, and a man with an instinct for display that modern marketing executives would recognize immediately. He understood that being rich was not enough. People had to know you were rich. In 1324, Mansa Musa decided to perform the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca required of every Muslim who is physically and financially able. He was physically able. He was financially able beyond any calculation. He spent years preparing. The caravan he assembled was unlike anything the world had ever seen or has seen since. 60,000 people, some sources say more. 12,000 slaves, each carrying a staff of pure gold weighing nearly 3 kilograms. 80 camels, each carrying between 50 and 300 pounds of gold dust. A personal retinue of 500 slaves, each carrying a golden staff. Horses, goats, food for tens of thousands of people crossing the Sahara. The entire procession stretched so far across the desert that people at the front could not see the people at the back. Mansa Musa did not travel to Mecca as a pilgrim. He traveled as a statement. The caravan entered Egypt in the summer of 1324. Cairo was the greatest city in the Islamic world, a metropolis of 500,000 people, seat of the Mamluk Sultanate, crossroads of trade between Africa, Asia, and Europe. Cairo had seen wealth before, it had never seen this. Mansa Musa met with the Mamluk Sultan al-Nasir Mohammed. The meeting was complicated. Mansa Musa refused to prostrate himself before the Sultan, as protocol demanded, on the grounds that he prostrated himself only before God. The Sultan, who had the power to execute him for this, chose instead to be impressed. And then Mansa Musa began giving. He gave gold to the Sultan. He gave gold to officials. He gave gold to scholars. He gave gold to strangers on the street. He distributed so much gold in Cairo during his stay that contemporary Egyptian chroniclers wrote of the event with a mixture of awe and horror. One Egyptian official, Ibn Amir Hajib, recorded that Mansa Musa's generosity was so extraordinary that it ruined the Egyptian gold market. The supply of gold increased so dramatically in Cairo that its value collapsed. Merchants who had stored gold as an investment suddenly found it worth a fraction of what they had paid. For 12 years after Mansa Musa's visit, Egypt struggled to recover. He hadn't invaded, he hadn't threatened. He had simply been generous. On his return from Mecca, Mansa Musa brought something back more valuable than the gold he had given away. He brought an architect. Abu Ishaq al-Sahili was an Andalusian poet and architect from Granada, one of the most sophisticated cities in the world. Mansa Musa invited him to Mali and paid him an extraordinary sum, roughly 200 kilograms of gold. Al-Sahili designed the Djingueber Mosque in Timbuktu, a structure still standing today, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of the oldest mosques in sub-Saharan Africa. But the mosque was only the beginning. Mansa Musa transformed Timbuktu from a trading post into one of the great intellectual centers of the medieval world. He built schools, libraries, and courts. He invited scholars, judges, and doctors from across the Islamic world. The University of Sankore, sometimes called the world's first university, expanded under his patronage, until it had an enrollment of 25,000 students. In a world where most of Europe's population was illiterate, Timbuktu had a book trade. Manuscripts were copied, bought, sold, and collected. Private libraries of thousands of volumes were common among the city's scholars. Mansa Musa did not just accumulate wealth, he spent it on knowledge. In 1375, 50 years after Mansa Musa's pilgrimage, a group of cartographers in Majorca, Spain, produced what is now called the Catalan Atlas. It was the most detailed map of the known world produced in medieval Europe. In the center of West Africa, the cartographers drew a figure on a throne. He is wearing a crown, he is holding a golden orb, he is surrounded by a golden nimbus, a halo of gold. The inscription next to him reads, "This black lord is called Mansa Mali, lord of the black peoples of Guinea. So abundant is the gold that is found in his country that he is the richest and most noble king in all the land." A Mallorcan cartographer, drawing a map for European merchants and sailors, placed the emperor of Mali at the center of the world. Not a European king, not the Pope. Mansa Musa. 50 years after his death, he was still the reference point for wealth and power on the most authoritative map in existence. To understand how one man could collapse an economy by being generous, you need to understand medieval gold. In the 14th century, gold was not just a symbol of wealth, it was money, literally. Gold coins were the primary medium of exchange across the Islamic world, Europe, and much of Asia. The value of gold depended, like all commodities, on supply and demand. The supply of gold in the medieval world was relatively fixed and relatively small. Mines produced slowly. Trade routes moved it gradually. The price was stable. Mansa Musa introduced an enormous quantity of new gold into the Cairo market in a matter of weeks. Supply went up, price went down. Egyptian merchants, North African traders, and Middle Eastern merchants who had priced their goods, their loans, and their savings in gold suddenly found themselves holding something worth less than before. Modern economists call this inflation. Medieval Egyptians called it a catastrophe. The chronicler Al-Makrizi wrote a century later that the flood of Malian gold had been so destabilizing that Egypt had not fully recovered for over a decade. Mansa Musa eventually tried to fix the damage. On his way back through Cairo, he borrowed gold from Egyptian merchants at high interest rates, deliberately reducing supply to drive the price back up. He was the first person in recorded history to deliberately manipulate a commodity market. Wealth alone does not build an empire, military power does. Mansa Musa commanded an army of roughly 100,000 soldiers, including a cavalry of 10,000 horses. In 14th century Africa, this was an overwhelming force. His most significant military achievement was the capture of Gao, the capital of the Songhai people, located at the bend of the Niger River. Gao was a wealthy trading city. Its capture extended Mali's control over the entire Niger River trade route, from its source to its delta. Mansa Musa did not just conquer Gao. He did something more sophisticated. He took the two sons of the Songhai king back to Mali, educated them at his court, exposed them to Malian culture and Islamic scholarship. When he released them, they returned to Gao as men who understood both their own culture and their conquerors. One of them would eventually lead a rebellion that destroyed the Mali Empire a century later. Empire building contains the seeds of its own unraveling. Mansa Musa could not have known this, but history has a habit of this kind of irony. Perhaps the most astonishing legacy of Mansa Musa is one almost nobody talks about. The books. When European colonizers arrived in West Africa in the 19th and 20th centuries, they brought with them an assumption that Africa had no written intellectual tradition, that knowledge in Africa was oral, that universities, libraries, and scholarship were imports from elsewhere. They were wrong. In the private homes of Timbuktu, hidden from colonial authorities, were hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, medical texts, mathematical treatises, astronomical observations, legal scholarship, poetry, history. The Mama Haydara Memorial Library alone holds 45,000 manuscripts. Across Timbuktu, estimates range from 300,000 to 700,000 documents. Most date from the era Mansa Musa created. When Islamic extremists invaded Timbuktu in 2012, local families smuggled roughly 300,000 manuscripts out of the city in secret, hiding them in trunks and transporting them by river to Bamako. They were protecting the evidence that a great African civilization had existed. Mansa Musa had built it. How rich was Mansa Musa exactly? Modern economists have tried to calculate this. The results are almost meaningless. The numbers are too large. Celebrity net worth estimated his wealth at $400 billion in 2012 dollars. Time magazine said it was impossible to calculate. Historians at the University of Oxford described his wealth as inconceivable by contemporary standards. Here is what we know concretely. At the time of Mansa Musa's reign, Mali produced more than 50% of the world's gold and salt supply. The empire's GDP, if we can use that term, represented a significant fraction of global economic output. By comparison, the richest person alive today, regardless of who that is, controls a fraction of a percent of global wealth. Mansa Musa may have controlled something closer to 1 or 2% of everything produced by every human being on Earth. The closest modern analogy is not a billionaire, it is a country. Mansa Musa was not richer than Jeff Bezos, the way Bezos is richer than you. He was richer than Jeff Bezos, the way a country is richer than a person. Mansa Musa died in 1337. The exact cause is unknown. He was likely in his mid-50s. What followed was a slow, painful unraveling. His son Mansa Musa inherited the empire but lacked his father's administrative genius and military authority. Within 4 years, the Mossi people raided and burned Timbuktu. Over the following decades, the Mali Empire fragmented. Vassal states declared independence. Rivals attacked from the north and east. The Songhai Empire, built partly by the very princes Mansa Musa had educated at his court, eventually absorbed what remained of Mali. By the late 15th century, the empire that had been the richest state in the world was reduced to a regional power. And then the Europeans arrived. Portuguese traders began appearing on the West African coast in the 1440s. They were looking for gold, the same gold that had made Mali legendary. They found a continent weakened by a century of internal fragmentation. What followed was not trade, it was extraction. And the memory of what West Africa had been, wealthy, sophisticated, literate, powerful, was buried under centuries of colonialism and the deliberate erasure of African history. Why does almost nobody know who Mansa Musa is? Part of the answer is geography. The primary sources about him are in Arabic written by Egyptian and North African chroniclers. They were not translated into European languages until the 20th century. Part of the answer is colonialism. The European colonial project required a specific story about Africa, that it was primitive, pre-literate, without complex civilization. Mansa Musa contradicted this story completely, so his story was not taught. Part of the answer is that history is written by the survivors. The Mali Empire did not survive. The Songhai Empire that replaced it did not survive. The scholars of Timbuktu spent centuries hiding their manuscripts rather than publishing them. But part of the answer is also simpler. We tend to remember the people who conquered us: Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Genghis Khan. Mansa Musa did not conquer Europe. He had no reason to. He was already richer than Europe. History remembers the hungry. It forgets the satisfied. In 1375, a Spanish cartographer put Mansa Musa at the center of the world. In 2012, Islamic extremists tried to destroy the library he built. In between, an entire civilization rose, flourished, and was deliberately forgotten. Mansa Musa walked out of West Africa with 60,000 people and 18 tons of gold, and accidentally broke an economy with his generosity. He built a university that educated 25,000 students when most of Europe couldn't read. He commissioned architecture that still stands today. He manipulated commodity markets with a sophistication that modern economists recognize and respect. And he did all of this in a place and a time that history decided not to remember. The Catalan Atlas is still in the National Library of Catalonia in Barcelona. The manuscripts are still in Timbuktu or hidden in Bamako, waiting. The Jingreber Mosque is still standing, still used for prayer every Friday. Mansa Musa left behind more evidence of his existence than most rulers in history. We just stopped looking. History never truly dies. It only waits in dust and in silence for someone willing to uncover it. If today's story carried you back through time, subscribe. There are still lost scrolls waiting, each one holding its place in line to be read. Lost Scrolls.